My name is Lorna O'Shea and I'm the Regional Placement Facilitator in the Discipline of Occupational Therapy. In this short PowerPoint presentation, I'll be giving a quick overview of supervision documentation and resources to support both the practice educator and the student in the clinical context. So on our practice education website, there is a practice education supervision protocol. In this protocol, you will see that there's a definition of supervision. It will describe the core elements of supervision. It will discuss the 4 areas of focus during supervision, the recommended frequency and format of supervision, and it will outline the supervision resources to both the student and the practice educator. What is recommended in terms of frequency and format is that supervision takes place weekly and that 1 hour is dedicated to a formal supervision session, and that this time is pre-arranged and in the diary of both the practice educator and the student. Where possible, supervision takes place in a suitable environment that is private and distraction free. It's very much a collaborative process, so both parties contribute, both the student and the practice educator. All supervision sessions are recorded using the Trinity College Dublin supervision form. Where possible, the student and the practice educator take turns in documenting, and the documentation itself is kept by the student and then entered into their CPD portfolio. There's a number of resources to support the supervision process, supporting both the practice educator and the student. There's lots of useful feedback resources. So in the practice education training, which is run at an inter-university level, there is a section specifically on feedback and the provision of feedback in a placement context. The OT Practice Education Network run a webinar series, one of the topics being feedback. There is the National Teaching and National Forum for Teaching and Learning have a lovely module on feedback also, so there are lots of resources available there, and providing good effective feedback is a key skill of a practice educator who is supervising a student. Other resources and documentation, there are pre-supervision forms for both the student and the practice educator. There's the standard weekly supervision form. The student obviously will have a learning contract, which will be referenced throughout supervision. There'll be a timelines and expectations and an assessment form for each year, again, which will be brought to each supervision session. Student reflections are very informative and useful to review during a supervision session. There's other relevant student work, for example, their case studies, their project work that they're doing, and the practice educator's reflections or any key recordings that they have across the week. So there's lots of different things that can be used as a resource in supervision. Very important that within each supervision session, the student is bringing their assessment form, the timelines and expectations form, their learning contracts, and anything that they feel will be useful and beneficial to discuss during the supervision session. There are 3 specific supervision forms to support both the student and the practice educator. So there's the weekly supervision form, which is the form that is filled out during or after the supervision session and signed by both the practice educator and the student. There's the student pre-supervision form, which is mandatory that the student must complete and provide to the practice educator in advance of the supervision session. And there's also a practice educator pre-supervision form. Now this is optional, but it is recommended, particularly if you are a novice practice educator. It helps to give you that structure and to allow for that preparation which is required for the supervision session. It is advised that the student provides their pre-supervision form to the practice educator in advance of the supervision session, ideally 24 hours in advance of the session, and that they also provide the weekly supervision form to the practice educator with the agenda completed, the student agenda, again 24 hours in advance of the supervision, which allows the practice educator time to review, consider, and to input their own items for the agenda. The student pre-supervision form includes the following. So progress with their learning objectives from the week, what went well across the week, what was challenging during the week, what competencies require further development based on their experiences this week, what specific resources are available to support the student in the development of the named competency, how does all of this impact on their learning contract, the creation of extended learning goals or learning objectives for the week ahead, and then signing off on the form completion. The practice educator pre-supervision form is exactly the same, has exactly the same questions for consideration around progress, what went well, what was challenging, what competency areas require development, what potential resources could support the student, and how does this inform their learning objectives, learning contracts for the week ahead, and then signing off. The weekly supervision form then is completed by both the student and the practice educator during the supervision session, ideally. Sometimes it will have to be finished after the supervision session. What's included in this form? There's the agenda, which both the student and the practice educator input. So this, as I said, the student will provide this form to the practice educator in advance of the supervision starting with their listed agenda. The practice educator will then update their items for the agenda, and then the supervision session will start, and you'll base the supervision session on this documentation. It's going to be asking the questions again: what went well, what was challenging, what competency areas require development, what can assist, what resources will support you. So again, it's very reflective of the pre-supervision forms which will have been completed by both the student and potentially the practice educator as well. It then allows for a summary, so the main points agreed and the main points discussed and the agreed objectives for the week ahead. And again, it's very important that both parties sign off. Very important that this is done in a timely manner. What can often happen in a busy clinical environment, you talk it through, then it's not documented, it's done a day or two after, you may forget to do the signatures. So where possible, allowing the time for the documentation to be completed during or directly after the supervision session, and ensuring that both parties read and sign off on them. A few practical tips to finish. It's advised that you use a supervision contract to set ground rules at the beginning of the placement. So again, looking at the duration, the timing, preparation involved for both the practice educator and the student, etc., etc. It's really important that it's scheduled in advance to avoid postponing or changing where possible. It's really important to be prepared for supervision so that both the student and the practice educator get as much as possible out of the supervision session. As I previously said, the student pre-supervision form is mandatory, whereas the practice educator supervision form is optional but recommended. Use the resources available to support. There's lots of documentation out there. There's lots of resources out there. Make sure before you begin your supervision session that you're checking you have your assessment form, you have the timelines and expectations, you have any relevant work from the week completed, whether that is your case study, your reflections, any important points that you want to raise with the practice educator. Ensuring that there's timely documentation and sign off, which I've just mentioned, and really important that issues are addressed early. So if there are issues in terms of competency development and competency, that these issues are flagged, they're discussed, and they're documented as timely as possible, and that support is obtained from the university-based practice education team. So thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. If you have any questions regarding supervision, please contact the practice education team, which is based in the university. The contact details are listed on the practice education website. Thank you.